Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, Jennifer and I are talking with Shana Francesca. And Shana is a speaker, writer, and entrepreneur. Her work centers around intentional leadership and life design. She believes our present and future are transformed when we infuse our lives with intention, design our lives, and realize the power in accepting ourselves as the author of our story. Very powerful words there, Shana. Thank you so much for being here. We're very excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk to you too. It feels very natural to talk to both of you.
Oh, good. Thank you. That's lovely to hear. Thank you.
So I wanted to start a little bit different today. I wanted to start with a quote from some of your writing. You wrote an article for Emotional Intelligence magazine, and you said, "There is so much I could say about how I grew up, all that I was given to overcome. But before I dive into what made me who I am today, I want to say that I do not wish a single minute of it were different. I love who I am. And if changing a single moment of what I have been through would change the person I've become, I would live through it all over again with better tools this time." I think that was a real striking way to start an article because from what I understand, you have had kind of a traumatic past. And to say
no kind of about it.
Yeah, tell us. You tell the story.
So it's so interesting, to step back into that quote for a moment. I think what I mean when I say that is that I don't think that trauma makes us who we are, right? I think trauma separates us from who we are. I think we are always who we are, right? But I don't think that a difficult moment or even an extremely painful moment has to be traumatic. I think it becomes traumatic when we don't have support around us, when we don't have people who we can trust with our story, who we don't have someone who is there holding our hands, or we can grab their hand and say, "I need you in this moment." That's when something for me has become traumatic, right? Because we can bounce back and be resilient from a lot of things. The important part of the quote is with better tools, because the tools would be community around myself, would be the understanding of how to build it. Because when the people around you, specifically your parents, are unhealthy, so are the people they have around them, right? Unhealthy people are not attracting healthy people into their life. It doesn't work that way. I was born into, so trigger warning for anybody listening, if you are healing, going through your own healing journey and are triggered by discussions around abuse, sexual violence, or any of those things, please enter into this conversation with care. You may want to exit out of this conversation or fast forward a few minutes into the podcast so that we make sure that you're being kind to yourself. I was born into an abusive household, and then my parents, about the time I was 5, joined an evangelical Christian evangelicity, and by the time I was 10, we were fully inside of an evangelical Christian cult. So my life and my most formative years were ones where I was facing significant abuse and high control environment at home, and then a high control religious environment outside of the home. I went to school there. I went to church there. I was at that church or school 6 days a week. And then at home all 7, right? And who I wanted to be and how I wanted to show up and who I am was punished consistently. I was told I was wrong. I was disrespectful. I was wrong just for being myself and for wanting to be myself, right? Like that's the part, right? Is that even wanting to be yourself is seen as rebellion, right? I mean, and I don't recognize rebellion as a real thing anymore. It's not, because no one has authority over us who we do not give it, right? And even as a child, you have a right to show up and be who you are. You're being who you are, right? And who you are might be contrary to who society allows you to be, but that doesn't make you wrong or bad. And so growing up in that high control environment where I wasn't allowed to lock my door, I wasn't allowed to shut my bedroom door unless I was getting changed, and I was only allowed to shut it for literally a few minutes, like 1 to 3 minutes getting a knock at the door. There was that much control over me and my body and my personhood. My imagination became a really important part of how I was able to imagine how I might be able to exist in the world and be seen and heard and understood. And it, honestly, between my imagination and my imagination is what stirred my curiosity, which in the end is what saved me, because that curiosity led me to read, right? And then that reading and that diving into my own curiosity, I started kind of creating my bedroom wall as a vision board, right? Like what we would call a vision board now, but I didn't call it anything. It was just my bedroom wall. I would take the J.C. Penney catalog that would come like 4 times a year, right? That's thick old baby that would come. Yeah, big thickum. Yeah.
Yep.
The big old thing. Yeah. And I was full of the images of the things that I wanted to be part of a life where I could be myself, right? And where I could reimagine myself whenever I wanted to. I wasn't just this fixed paper doll. I wasn't required to show up as pure and as chaste and as obedient. And I would dog ear the pages, so I could go back through and I could really, take in those images again and be like, does this really still feel like me? Is this me? It's fascinating because at one point in time, my dad noticed how powerful it was for me. And so he took it and he said I wasn't allowed to do that anymore. I wasn't allowed to imagine, because it was harmful for me to imagine a life outside of the one that was being provided for me. And luckily, my mom advocated for that not to happen. She was like, it's not going to hurt her to dream. And it was these little moments where that little bit of pushback, kind of saved me, but it didn't matter. I would go sit in the doctor's office, right, in the waiting room, and I would tear pages out of the magazines really quietly, because you would get in trouble if you tore the pages out. And I would stuff those into my pockets and bring them home and tape them up on the wall. I'd get excerpts from back in the day. We had real calendars, right? And I had, the inspirational quotes with the autumn background. When I say that it was life or death, it was life or death. Right. I had to be able to imagine a world outside of the one that I lived in, because what I was living was dying. It was not living. I was forced to take a chastity pledge at the age of 12 by my father in front of our 2,500 person church, even though I wanted to do it privately. But I had been raped at the age of 3.5 by my babysitter's son. And so I technically wasn't a virgin. Again, I do not believe that virginity is a real thing. I believe it's a construct. Hymens don't even exist for all people. I wasn't technically a virgin, and there was a lot of trauma around that. I was 12. It had been done to me when I was 3.5. It was not that far removed from my life and my conscience, right? And so I had a really hard time with it, but I was forced to do that. And then my father spent the next 3 years grooming me and sexually assaulted me at the age of 15. And as traumatic as that moment was, it was the crack that became a fissure that became the deconstruction of all that I was forced to embody that had nothing to do with me. It became the catalyst for my deconstruction, and ultimately the thing that brought me to who I am today. Again, I say, I don't know that I would have but to live that life again, right? But I do think that I would do so and be able to advocate for myself differently. If I had the wisdom I have now, I would have been able to maybe keep an eye out for the people who saw but didn't know what to do or how to help. But I could have gone to them and I could have asked for help. I do think that it would have, maybe I would be a different person, but I would have had better tools if I could go back and do it again.
And you said in that quote that you love yourself, which is such a beautiful thing, because many children come out of trauma not loving themselves. How do you think you were able to do that?
Yeah, I didn't for a very long time. I didn't. I kept a journal. I kept diaries. I mean, the goal is to write a book in the not too distant future. but I have to make sure that I'm going to need a certain amount of support to go back through those journals, see what it gets incorporated and what's not incorporated, but either way, I kind of have to go through them. But I think who I was at the time was not somebody who I wanted to love myself. I desperately wanted to love myself, but I kept being told that who I was bad and wrong. Right. And so that becomes a part of how you see yourself. Right. And and I think about that for me, and I think about how so many people may not be being abused at home, but they leave home environment and they're bad or wrong, right? Just for existing in their own body and within their own skin, right? And other people feel like they have a right to an opinion about somebody else's body without any firsthand knowledge of who they are as a human being, right? And they're not even approaching fellow human being as a human being. They're approaching that person as an object, as an idea, rather than a human. That's the crux of my work, right? That's what's led me to my work, right, around intentional leadership living, is because I understand just how detrimental it is firsthand, right, to be made bad or wrong, to not be able to embody space, to not be able to bring your full creativity, for your needs not to be being met, for you not giving, and then someone expect you to contribute to their thriving. When we're talking about leadership, we're talking about understanding that if our people are creating an environment where they are thriving, where we're honoring them fully, and they can't thrive, then how do we expect them to contribute to our thriving, right? So it's this through line of, I saw what really intentionally harmful leadership looks like, and I want to be part of, showing people there's a pathway to being something other than that.
Thank you for telling your story. I imagine that it's somewhat difficult to keep doing so. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate your candid nature in retelling all that. Your story brings up two things for me, which initially sound like they're not related, but in my head they're related. So we'll go with it. One is, you came from an unsafe background, an unsafe home. And part of your work is helping other people now create a safe home, a space, a serenity for themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that is fantastic and so beautiful that you came from where you did, and now you're helping people find what you so desperately needed as a child. So I think that's beautiful. The other thing that comes up for me, you're talking about reading and how, using your imagination, and the interviews that you've had and podcasts you've been on, you're always talking about all these other authors, right? You're always referencing all these books that you've read.
Yeah.
It brings up for me that you're a voracious reader, and you've gotten so much out of it, and it's so prominent in your life, and it's right there, like it's nothing but beneficial for you. But now there's all these people who want to ban all these books, and they're going, and succeeding generations are in danger of missing out on the benefit and the growth that you've gotten, and that we've all gotten from reading.
Yeah. Reading about a frog does not make you an amphibian, right?
Yeah.
So understanding about the sun doesn't turn you into a supernova, right? Like we learn about the world around us to expand our understanding of not only our own humanity, but our connection to the other living thing. Through education, we find community, we find connection. And to me, nuance lives in community. Nuance lives in us listening to and understanding and believing and leaning into each other's stories. Black and white dichotomies happen with lack of understanding, lack of education, with desire to have power over people, and the need to win. By the way, our education system is already not great, right? Is already not meeting the bar of actually educating people. I would argue that our education system, if we can even call that's like calling our prison system a justice system, if we're going to call it education at all, but our system of teaching in this country is more about the industrialization of human beings, about teaching people how to be within the corporate environment, to know their place, to want to win over others, to be stack ranked against each other, right? All of
Yep.
these are objectification and dehumanizing tactics that do not belong in anything we call an education system. So when we are denying people access to information, it is absolutely always for the purpose of control,
Yep.
and of furthering propaganda. I truly believe that curiosity can and does change the world. It changed my life, literally. It changed my life. Right? I'm always surrounded by books. I have stacks of books that I'm reading all at the same time. I was just holding up Leading with Joy by Akaya Winwood. I started reading it recently because I fell in love with the book How We Show Up by Mia Birdsong, and she talks about Akaya in the book, and I was like, Akaya has to have her own book. And so I went in search of it. I'm always diving into curiosity. I'm always learning more about the world, and all it does is draw me closer to people. When we deprive people of education, it makes it easier for them to be afraid, and to be afraid of fear. Because the thing about fear is it's typically the recognition that we are at the edge of our understanding or knowledge, or the edge of our understanding of what we thought ourselves capable of previously. We've hit that border of what we thought ourselves capable of. But if you don't have any education to help you guide through that next expansion, or expand into the next moment, or connect to and listen to the story of someone, if you don't have the tools and the resources, you have no recourse in that moment. You have no support, no community. The books I read are the mentors in my head. They are a chorus of people who show up for me in a variety of moments that I'm unfamiliar with, or I don't know how to navigate. They are mentors for me. If you don't have that, you're left with what? So much more easy to manipulate. And so make no mistake about it, I'm sure many people recognize this, but anybody saying that they're banning books to protect children is a liar. Full out is a liar.
Yep.
Is a liar. Because the books that they're banning are books that are teaching kids about the Holocaust, about slavery, about all of these things that are part of our history that we did, that we didn't do, the ways we didn't show up, and the ways that we did in really harmful ways, right? And to not know your history is to put yourself in serious danger of repeating it. And it's not that you're in danger of repeating it, it's because someone's actively trying to repeat it.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think we've heard the kind of passive version of that, is that if we don't know history, it will repeat itself. And it makes it this kind of passive thing that we can't put a name to. No, we can put a name to it. We know exactly who's trying to repeat that history, and we know exactly how they're trying to. Make no mistake about it. This is an assault against people's humanity.
That's a really great point, that it's not that history will repeat itself. It's being repeated.
On purpose.
On purpose. That's a really good point. And I think maybe that doesn't get enough attention in the discussion. So thank you for bringing that up.
I mean, you see it, Raquel, in Florida and Texas, like blaring its face right now.
In Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
All
it's
these,
everywhere.
it's everywhere. Yeah. It's everywhere. Arizona, everywhere. I mean, you see what's happening is that women are finding their voice, right? Women and non-men. You know, the spectrum of, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I just mean everyone who's not a cisgendered. And for those people who are uncomfortable with understanding what people using the word cis, it's not a slur. Cis just means aligned with. That's all that it means, right? And for many people, they haven't been taught things about biology, like the fact that there are human beings on this planet in the Dominican Republic and South America who have literally, they're born with genitalia, and then at puberty, their body presents with an entirely different set of genitalia naturally. There's a whole set of words around it. There's language around it, right? It has existed since the beginning of recorded time, right? But you're not taught that it's made it easier to weaponize your lack of understanding. Whenever somebody's trying to tell you that a word is bad, be aware, right? Like a word like that that's just helping to frame something, right? Like there are bad words, hateful words, and that's a different thing. But I think it's important for you to look up the definition of something and to understand it for yourself. Go on to Google Scholar or get some information about something and truly understand its roots, its history. Where does it come from? How has it been used? Even if it's a hateful word, because I think if it's a hateful word and you're doing that research, you're understanding how it's been weaponized to harm someone, and you're educating yourself in a way that's truly necessary. And so I really think it's important for us to dive into language and be careful when we're unfamiliar with someone, with a word, and then someone's trying to weaponize it, right? So we got to dive in and do that education.
That ties into what you were saying a little bit ago about curiosity.
Yeah.
Right? Like curiosity is at the seat of growth. Curiosity drives growth.
Yeah.
And
you can't grow if you're not curious. You literally can't learn anything if you're not curious.
Exactly. Yeah. And one thing that I find really interesting, because I do want to tie this a little bit back to specifically the work that you do, is that you spend time getting to know the people that you work with, your clients, whether it's clients that you're coaching or clients that you're doing design projects for, whether it's interior design as the home or interior design as their head, the way that you have said in some of your other interviews, or whether it's other types of design, just life design. So
all connect. Yeah, it's all connected. Design is just a function of intention. So anytime we get intentional about something, we design it, right? It's the difference between going into your kitchen and taking all the foods you see and lumping them together in a bowl and calling that dinner, or actually having a plan and a recipe and then going to the grocery store and getting the items that you need, right? There's a plan in place. There's an intention for that moment. There's desire for a specific outcome. Whether I'm talking about coaching through their business, whether they're an entrepreneur, if they've been in business for years and years for themselves, whenever somebody gets in the space of an expert, it's hard to flow and to be present with change. And so that's where my work really comes in, is that I help people get curious about their own life, their own lives, their own wants, their thoughts, their desires, whether they're a leader of a corporation, the leader of a nonprofit, or they're just the leader of their own life, right? I take that trust, because we are leaders no matter who we are, and just kind of trivializes that. So whether you are the leader of your own life or leader in any other aspect, it's all the same thing. They're all reflections of one another, because who we are in private is who we are in public. And if we aren't using our private life as a practice ground for how we're showing up as a leader, we're not really we're not learning and growing in our private life. We're not learning and growing as a leader. We're not actually showing up for our people the way that we need to, or that they need us to, right? Because for me, leadership is about recognizing that we're all part of an ecosystem. National Geographic defines an ecosystem as a geographic area where a variety of plants and animals and organisms live together, supported by the land and the weather, to create a bubble of life. And I posture that, what if we looked at our lives, our community, the people around us? What if we looked at creating our life, our leadership, our community, our teams as bubbles of life? And we recognize that a wide variety of things and people need to be present in that moment for us to be able to truly see and recognize and show up as ourselves, right? Because we can't show up as our true selves and truly be beneficial to the if we're surrounded by homogeneity, right? We need that variety, and it needs to be practiced in our personal life so that we can show up in that way as a leader. And so I work with people, whether it's, and I don't take on too many interior design clients anymore, but with people I really love to work with, I'll take on 1 or 2 projects at a time. And the first thing we sit down is like, who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? And then in what way do we create and craft an environment that's a beautiful reflection of all the unique things you are, not what you saw on Instagram, not what you see on Pinterest, who you are. And how do we reflect that back to you so you recognize that who you are gets to and needs to take up space and authentically connected to who you are, right? You're not taking space away from other people. You're taking up what space is meant for you and you only.
I love that. You're not taking space from somebody else.
Yeah.
You're taking up the space that you're meant to exist in.
And you can't know what that is unless you're diving in.
Right.
And how many of us women were like sort of socialized not to take up space at all, to get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah. And far too many people raised as men have been raised to take up all the space, to use up all the energy. And to the detriment of so many people, and without their recognition of how much space they're taking up. I mean, down to the fact of how they sit, right? Like they have private
like
parts
the man
between their
spreading?
legs, and they're taking up. So I'm like, women have boobs, and you don't see us walking around like this, right? So that our boobs don't touch each other. That's not, I mean, I saw that somewhere. Somebody said that, I think on TikTok, probably on TikTok. And I was like, that's the most brilliant thing I've ever heard, right? Women don't walk around and be like, excuse me, my boobs need more space, right? Like there's a certain amount of, yes, I understand it's uncomfortable. And yes, you might need to spread your legs, but I get that. But you don't need to do so in such a preposterous way that you're taking up so much space away from other people, especially when there is little space to be taken up in certain scenarios, right? Like be cognizant of how much space you're taking up. Or like noise level. Men tend to take up a lot more space as far as noise level. They'll walk through spaces completely unaware of how much noise they're making. They're watching things on their phone. They're talking very loudly. They're taking up that space so that other people do not have the mental space, do not have the quiet that they would need to be able to process and actually exist in the world, right? So like it's down to those things that there's just no recognition for some people. And so that's why I say you've got to recognize what's meant for you. And if you're living in community, you're recognizing the ripple of everything that you do. And you're taking ownership of the impact of your actions, and you're connecting with people that your actions are impacting, and you're recognizing and taking ownership of that and taking accountability for it. So like it's this whole, it's like, that's why I say who you are in private is who you are in public. There's no the people who try to do that, it leaks all over the place, and you can tell.
Yeah. On your website, it says the pillars of life design are intention, alignment, and excellence. Can you go into that a little bit?
I should probably update that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've tweaked things over the last year because, like I say, I reserve the right.
Growing.
Correct. I'm always growing. I'm always learning. And that was the original language that I have around that. And I knew it was getting there, but it wasn't there. And so I just kept getting curious and doing my own research. And over the last year, the language has changed. And so I look at what intentional living is. It is the combination of, and I have it in an equation form now. So it's be curious plus be respectful times practice accountability equals intentional and ethical living and leadership. I think the reason why I changed many of the words that I use is because excellence and alignment, excellence is kind of a word that kind of can be easily co-opted into like winning and power over others. And I was like, that's not it. And I don't know that I want to try to steer that Titanic, you know what I mean? To try to get people to change the definitions of words. I want to use words that people already understand, and we can really anchor into those words. And alignment just felt like it was kind of in spiritual woo land that I don't have a problem with, but also like the spirituality to evangelical Christianity pipeline is very, very, very real and very much aligns with patriarchal ideas. And so I wanted to pull away from that as well, because I wanted to make sure that we're pulling it away from religion and it becomes something we understand that we're accountable no matter what we believe. And so here we are with curiosity, respectfulness, and accountability.
I like it.
I think I love it. I think it's real interesting because what you said a minute ago about we can't be someone different than we are in our home, than we are at work. Yeah. I found that to be very true for myself in my own leadership. I started adopting this intentional leadership at work for myself. And then I realized, oh, I need to be an intentional parent. And then I realized, oh, when I go on a date, I need to be very intentional about that. And then everything becomes intentional.
It's like a crepe cake. Everything, right? And so that's why I say to people, like, let's start with a really easy, right? Like, let's get our brains curious about the ways we can be intentional with really easy things that seem trivial, but are not necessarily, they're not trivial because our brains are dumb. They need easy things, right? And we also need to I don't want to lump onto people more, that they've got to do more, right? So
Right.
what I try to do is help people to create practices around what they're already doing and become more in tune with what they're already doing. For instance, I ask people like, how often do you think about all the scents that are on your body every day and how they work together, right?
Mm.
Like, how often do you think about the fact that you're using a perfume, shampoo, conditioner, body wash, lotion? You have all these different scents that are happening on your body at the same time. And what if we just took an extra, and deodorant too, right? So like, what
Yeah.
if we just took an extra second to think about, okay, you know what? This month, really busy month for me. And I think I'm going to need a little bit of relaxate to remind myself and to help my body to know it's safe and it's okay. And I'm going to care for it. And I'm not going to push it too far. And I'm going to take time for self-care. And I'm going to remind myself, because scent is one of our strongest connections to memory and emotion. And for me, lavender is a relaxing smell. So I'll keep a lavender candle around that I light when I'm done working to let my brain know, okay, we're done now. It's okay to disconnect and to move on to a moment of relaxation, right? And then I'll have all of these scents that kind of move around lavender, right? So they'll be either complementary, they work together. So like my shampoo will be citrus and I'll have lavender and citrus deodorant, and my fabric sheets, I use the actual brand sheets because it's plant-based. So that's lavender this month, right? But maybe next month I'm looking at wanting a different scent, and everything's around rose, or everything's around citrus, or you know what I mean, or everything's around mint in the winter, something that feels bright. But taking that moment to think about how can all these scents coordinate, right? And getting intentional in that moment, or getting intentional about how you feel will move through your own home. Are in your walking path, is there something you always are bumping your leg on, or something that's like not really functioning for you, and you pile stuff on top of, and you really need it to be a bookshelf, or you really need it to be an organizational center, and you're not giving yourself permission to make it that because, oh well, when people come in they might see it, and it doesn't matter, it's your home. It's your home.
Yeah.
It needs to support you, not some person who may sometimes show up and be judgmental. Because if somebody's judgmental about how you've set up your home to support you, they don't belong in your home in the first place. We need to be intentional about who we're letting in our space, who we're inviting around, right? And we might need to set boundaries with people and say, hey, I appreciate that you think you're helping, but this is my home and I've set it up how I need it to be. You're not welcome to have an opinion about it. Henceforth, no opinion.
Why is there so much judgment around homes? Because I've noticed that a lot. I've felt that over the years, especially when my kids were young and people were over and the toys were everywhere. And I didn't keep up with my laundry because it was not my priority to do my laundry.
Yeah. Well, it's also not your entire stability, right? Because were you married at the time, or you were single at the time?
I was divorced. Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, but like when we're looking at relationships, a man is never judged for the piled up laundry, but a woman is.
Yes.
Right? It's a matter of keeping women busy, because that steals our power. Keeping people busy steals their power. In our current system, you keep people busy, right? And you keep them pitted against each other, and you keep them not in community with one another. Because I go back to what I said, is that nuance and our power exists in community with one another. Black and white dichotomies and needing to win and needing to be better than and needing to have power over exists in these spaces where there's hyper individuality. And so it's your responsibility as the woman to take care of the home. And I have to keep busy so that you don't have the time to connect in your community, within your state, within this country, right? So we have to keep women busy.
I heard you say on the Spinster Life podcast with, I think her name is, and
you guys did your research. Love it.
Amy Kelberg, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, I loved the podcast. It was so good. But you spoke about men being raised as colonizers and women to be colonized, which speaks to that. And I had never really thought about it like that before.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Once you start diving into and understanding capitalism and white supremacy and how they are indelibly tied together, and I came to that realization not on my own, 100% it came from, and this last year, I mean, I read a lot, as you notice, so I can't take credit for all the things that come out of my mouth. So in this past year, I read James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. I read Mickey Kendall's Hood Feminism. I'm always reading something by Maya Angelou, or rereading something. I'm surrounded by a chorus of people people who've done incredible work. Once you start to see it, right? Once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. And so, yeah, absolutely. Men are raised to be colonizers, to take up all the space. And women are raised to be colonized, have all of their energy and their resources used for the benefit of other people, but never for themselves. Because if it's used for yourself, then you are selfish, then you are haughty, then you are the B word. You are a lot of things, but you are not human. When you sit there and you really sit with that, you're like, oh, yeah. And it creates a really important shift, I think, when you have that recognition for both men and women, right? Because there's no humanity in either role.
Exactly. There's not.
You lose parts of yourself in being the colonizer. You have to disrespect your own humanity, to disrespect and harm other people, right? It's just like, and I hate to use this example because I'm not a fan of hers, Jake, but Harry Potter is so ubiquitous, it's hard not to. In the idea of the Horcrux, right? In creating, killing other people and separating, there's this powerful recognition that, like, when we separate ourselves and compartmentalize ourselves, or something that dies in that, and we're never truly whole, and we're harming other people to get to that place where we're compartmentalizing ourselves. I mean, there's so many parallels into how we operate in this world and how we're required to, right? My work centers around all of us getting curious and listening to each other's stories and recognizing that there's so much that we have to learn from each other in ways we're not showing up for each other because we weren't taught. But ultimately, there's so much, that there's only so much women can do. We can band together, but we really need men to get to the place where they are not actively harming other people, and that they're showing up for themselves and showing up for each other and creating community together. Because until women are safe, we can't be in community with you. And the quote unquote good guys benefit from the bad guys, right? Because the good guys can say, oh, I'm not like that. I don't actively rape and murder, but you're not helping to create systems where that's held accountable, standing up for and actually protecting women. Men typically only protect women they're attracted to. So if you're only respecting and protecting and you're attracted to, you don't actually respect women. You're not actually fulfilling this mandate, right? There's so much that has to be like deconstructed, that has to be worked on, and that really has to start with, like, women, us creating community and supporting each other, which I think we're doing beautifully and really well, but men have to do that for themselves too.
Yeah, and men aren't typically very good at that, or they haven't been given
taught.
They haven't been taught the skills.
They've been taught
to do that.
And there's enough resources out there that they aren't owed the emotional labor of the women around them to teach them, right? Yes. There's lots of books. Just like I taught myself, like, I came from an evangelical Christian cult and what I now recognize as white supremacy, right? Even though it was a multicultural church, there was still white supremacy there. Lots of it.
But as a kid, you didn't know that. As a kid,
but once I got old enough, right? The point is, I got on. I'm 38 now, right? I left cold at 26, but I didn't leave evangelical Christianity until 4 or 5 years ago.
Wow!
Because I ultimately recognized that evangelical Christianity was the problem. That it itself, the ideology, leads to cult behavior. That was my recognition for myself. But all along the way, I was educating myself and going through that deconstruction process, which takes a long time. Like, even if men today, all of them collectively, started doing the work, it would take at least a decade, if not two, us to really see men to be able to show up in the ways that perhaps in just a partial way of which would give them their humanity back and allow them to truly understand what community is. In the same way that even if we stopped with carbon emissions today, went to zero carbon emissions, the planet would continue to heat, like, for an indefinite period of time. We don't know how long it would take for the planet to actually absorb and redistribute the heat properly that we have created, right? Because the ocean is so hot now, it would take a lot of time, just like a boiling pot of water, for that heat to actually be redistributed and for the planet to be able to actually absorb, handle that, right? It's the same way. Men have got to do that work. It's going to take a long time. And they also haven't been taught to weather that, because the emotional, physical labor has always been done by women.
Yep.
So they haven't even been taught to have the longevity, to have, like, the capability for that long distance.
The stamina.
Right? Thank you. That's the word. The stamina. To continue doing the work. So they've got to, like, really start there.
So they need to be intentional in educating themselves
which is why we go back to and curiosity and accountability. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, I just turn to men and I say, look, I'm not saying that women can't teach you, but what I am saying is you're not entitled to it, and it's not for free.
Yeah. And
So
they shouldn't expect it.
Yeah, they can't expect it. So it's a matter of like, you should expect to have to pay for it, or barter for it, or exchange for it, or like whatever it is, you are going to have to actually pay for it, because you've been taught. Like, so many men are like, well, I want to learn, teach me. I don't owe you that. I don't owe you a damn thing. I do not owe you anything. I don't owe you one fraction of a second of my time. That's the thing. That's where you got to start, is the entitlement. And that's where accountability comes in, and surrounding yourself with a variety of people who are actually saying, you know what, that's not okay. You can't do or say that, right? And that accountability starts with like perhaps paying women in your life to teach you.
Yeah.
Or getting books, right? There's other ways, like surrounding yourself with books. There's lots of books that people can dive into, that, you know, fair play. There's lots of education out there, right? That you can surround yourself with. Everyone should be a feminist. All of these incredible books that you can surround yourself with. And I'm just going to say this for people. When it comes to dismantling the patriarchy, and when it comes to recognizing white supremacy, and when it comes to, because they're indelibly tied, I don't care if you don't understand it at this moment, they are. It's really important that you be learning from a wide variety of people, which needs to heavily include Black and brown women.
Absolutely.
Not white men. You should not be picking up books by people who look and sound like you. No, because they're not far enough in their journey. They're like Liz said, what's her last name? She is one of the co-hosts on the Man Enough podcast. She said,
Liz Plank.
Liz Plank. Thank you. Yes. She said, the oppressed always know their oppressor better than the oppressor knows themselves.
Yes.
So you as a man, specifically if you're a white man, cannot be getting advice or learning from other white men. I mean, sure, you can get some of your education and some support and create community, but ultimately you really need to be turning to Black and brown women and trans women and queer people in general. That's where you're going to find the education that you really truly need. And if you're uncomfortable with that, you need to get comfortable with that. Ease yourself in. Like whoever told you that life is supposed to be comfortable lied to you. We have to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable.
You know, like we were saying earlier, curiosity leads to growth.
Yes.
And growth isn't easy. You said it somewhere. It's challenge, not trauma.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's that, exactly. When facing difficult moments and we're doing it together, it's a challenge and it's growth, right? And we're not looking to traumatize one another, right? We're not looking to perpetuate that. And so there has to be a differentiation between the two. And I know that for men, and I truly understand that you do not have community. Men are so lonely, right? They're so lonely. They're taught that they've got to compete with each other, and they've got to dominate women and non-men. Like it is so lonely, and I cannot, my heart breaks for you. Truly,
Me
truly,
too.
I cannot imagine how lonely it is. There was a trans man I was watching on TikTok, and he said, being raised as a woman, he said, you know, there's none of that. There's not the woman in the bathroom who is holding your hair back while you're throwing up, or giving you advice because that man out there that you're having dinner with or you're on a first date with, empowering you to just walk away. There's not that camaraderie. There's not the conversation. I mean, we have profound conversations with complete strange women in the bathroom. Right? Like on a regular basis, men are constantly taught to compete with each other. So there's no real connection. Like I say, I go back to it. Community happens in the nuance and community, understanding of the world around you, and true connection happens in community. It can't happen when there's hyper individualization. We're trying to have power over others and trying to win. That is a recipe for loneliness. If anything, start there. Start there with trying to understand what that looks like. Again, I would recommend Mia Birdsong's How We Show Up. I think it's a soft, kind entrance into the conversation of how do we create community around ourselves? How do we understand how to be less harmful to each other and truly listen to one another?
That leads me to the point of, if a man is intentional about this and he becomes the leader of his own life, he then becomes an example for other men that they can do this too.
Yeah.
So he's taking the steps to create community.
Yeah, and there's men who are doing that work on TikTok. There's incredible creators there, like Speech Professor, like Professor Neil. There are men who are doing this work and ushering in men and other men into this work, and having the important conversations that need to be had with one another, and truly creating community around themselves and connecting to each other. And they can be guideposts for you.
She's gone. Kel, I think it's real interesting. I think that what we've created here today is the ultimate episode for a man who wants to get intentional.
Very good point. Yeah, I think you're right, because I think there's so many guys who want to learn and want to do things, but they aren't sure where to start or have no idea where to start, but they know that they shouldn't be asking women to do it for them. But they're like, okay, I get that, but where do I go?
Yeah. And this is very practical advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thankfully, because Shana is such a lover of reading and she shares it. Yeah, and she shares this information, right? Like she's like telling you all these titles and these authors, and it's just like blowing in the yeah, like I've written down so many. I've added so many books into my Amazon book wish list based on listening to Shana.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. I think it's a fascinating conversation when you talk about, okay, so she's a life design coach, Is that the right title? When you think about that, and then how we took that all the way to, this is a feminist podcast, and we just spent all this time talking about how men can be intentional and connect. That's a fascinating conversation, because most men would say, you're a feminist, you don't care about men. But she clearly said, right. And Shana also clearly said, really concerned about men, know that they're suffering, know that they're lonely. We want to help, but it takes all of us to help. You have to help yourself too.
Yeah. And like she was saying about nuance and community, and she talks a lot about nature and how the ecosystem, there's different things in the ecosystem, and they all sort of, it's symbiotic, right? They all thrive because they're all there. Right. The ecosystem thrives because of the diversity. It takes all of us. It's not just women who need to be in this fight. I mean, you and I have said this, hell, at least 100 times, that it isn't just us. It isn't just women. It isn't just Black women. It isn't just brown women. It's everybody. We all have to be in this. We all have to be in this to raise each other up. Hey,
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
It has happened to all of us.
Oh yeah. All of us, for sure.
So we were just kind of doing our recap a little bit early, and now you're back. And one of the things we were excited to talk about is this episode has kind of turned into like a roadmap for men to be intentional about aligning with feminism, which is cool because it's the message we have been trying to kind of put out there since the very beginning, that feminism is for all of us.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, I try to distinguish, because I think I try to say I'm an intersectional feminist. I try to remember to distinguish it that way, because white feminism is where it started, and radical white feminism is harmful, right?
Yes.
So
Agreed.
we want there's a distinction there, because radical white feminism absolutely clamored its way over top of the bodies of Indigenous and Black and brown people, and trans people, and so on and so forth. So we want to make sure that we're absolutely recognizing that we have to be intersectional to actually be intentional.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good
I love
point.
that. We have to be intersectional in order to be intentional.
Yeah.
I love that. That I need to put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Put it on one of her note cards and
yes,
your wall.
Put it on a flashcard and put it up on my wall. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it.
One of the things that we didn't tell our guests, if they wanted to work with you or connect with your work, how would they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest way to find me is on my website. It's www.concinnate.world. World, not .com. Concinnate is Concinnate. I'm sure they'll tag it in the show notes. But that's the easiest way to find me. There's lots of information there. We're in the process of updating the website, obviously. I like every 6 months we've got to update because I change, I learn, I grow, I do more, and everything changes along with it. So it's like a constant process of updating.
That's
Excellent.
awesome.
Learning educational materials, my talks, all of it. 6 months in, I'm like, oh, I got to go back and change that because I know more now, and so it's got to be different. Yeah, that's the easiest way. Or you can email me, Shana@concinnate.world. You'll find all this stuff there. There's lots of tagged podcasts that I've been on. But if you're interested in having me, come and speak, absolutely reach out, email me.
What does Concinnate mean?
Okay, it means to arrange or blend together skillfully as parts or elements put together in a harmonious, precisely appropriate, or elegant manner.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Harmony and elegance. I love those.
And being precisely appropriate, not perfect, right? Because what's precisely appropriate for us is for us, right? Again, like we recognize when we're in community together, we recognize what's appropriate for us and what's actually meant for someone else to take on, and we don't have to take on all the things, and we actually don't want to, because we would harm other people, because we all need to be seen, heard, understood, and valued. And so we wouldn't want to take away what is meant for someone else when we're truly in community together.
God, I love that.
That needs to be in every workplace's wall. Every workplace's wall.
Yeah,
because
no kidding.
There's always somebody who is carrying a workload because they think they should, and really pieces of that belong to other people. I've seen that a million times.
Or it's been thrust upon them because of a bad boss.
Yeah, that's true.
And oftentimes I would say that I see women having things thrust upon them, right? And men being the ones who are sitting back and allowing that to happen, rather than recognize that it actually needs to be distributed amongst a wide variety of people, and that people will gain the skills necessary, right? We don't give something to somebody just because they currently have the skills, because skills can be learned. And so we don't have to stick it with the person who currently has those skills. We can have somebody learn those skills through the action.
Hallelujah.
To gain those skills, you have to you gain them through the doing, and practice makes perfect. Anything you want to be good at, you have to practice. And so we have to allow the people around us to practice.
I love that. I mean, it's, it goes back to being curious, learning and being curious about the nuances, building community, being intentional. There's so much of this that's left out of basically how to be a human. Right?
Yes.
Like I think all of this, Shana, is you're basically teaching, and in some cases reminding, maybe teaching us how to be a human.
We're a part of an ecosystem, right? We don't stop exploiting each other, exploiting the ecosystem around us. We won't exist anymore. We will put ourselves off this planet. We will literally kill ourselves off. This planet will continue to exist without us, right? It will go on without us, but we won't be able to go on, right? And so, teaching ourselves how to, or learning how to be human again, is fundamental to our survival, literally, right? So we gotta fix it, and we gotta fix it now. And I think that's been part of my own education, is teaching myself how to be human. What the hell does that mean? What does it mean? How do I be me and be human and recognize how powerful I am, while recognizing that I shouldn't use that over people? Like, it's so nuanced. It's all so nuanced, and we don't have any understanding of it. And so, fundamentally, I think I'm teaching people how to be human because I had to teach myself.
From your experience. Because, I mean, like you said, you wouldn't change what you've been through, but you have better tools now. Right. And now you're sharing those tools with us. So I don't think thank you is a strong enough response, but thank you for putting this all out here and trying to teach people how to be good humans.
I really do believe that people want to. I don't think most of us recognize how harmful we are being to each other. That's why I say we have to do this work in community, because if you try to do it on your own, you will crumble. It will kill you to recognize how harmful you've been without your understanding of it, right? Like to come to that recognition and to take ownership and accountability for that, it will kill you if you try to do it on your own. Like you will mentally not be in a good place. Don't do it on your own. You have to do it in community.
Yeah, that's powerful. That was really powerful.
Thank you so much, Shana. This has just been such an enlightening conversation, an illuminating conversation. So thank you so much for doing what you do and for being on the show and sharing all of this and continuing to grow. Keep reading all these books and keep telling us about all these books so that we can read them too. Like I was telling Jennifer, I've put so many of the books that you have mentioned today and in other, the articles that you've written and that have been written about you and podcasts that you've been on. My book wish list is much longer now.
I'll send you my workshop book wish list.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. My little nerdy heart just grew 3 sizes.
I read so much, so I try to narrow it down to the ones that I've read multiple times.
Thank you so much, Shana.
Well, we kind of did our recap. Do you have any final thoughts that we didn't cover?
I want to encourage people to definitely to look at the show notes for this episode. I mean, our other episodes too, because we always put, links to things in the show notes, but there's so many books, first of all, that Shana references that I think other people can get some real value out of. Just a little curiosity goes a long way. It doesn't have to be this huge earth-shattering step. We've said this before about other things. Just take that first step. Just be curious about that first thing. And it just kind of goes from there. I mean, it started for Shana with putting index cards on her wall when she was a kid. And now look at where she is. And now look at the work that she's doing and the people that she's impacting. Just start where you can. Be curious and start where you can. I think that's the only other thing I wanted to put out there. But this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed speaking to Shana. Yeah, like you said, it's almost like this is a primer for men on how to take the next step.
Yeah, that would be awesome, wouldn't it? And the other thing I was thinking real quick, I would encourage, because I worked in the corporate world for so long, I would encourage people who have a position within their company to request speakers to look at Shana's work, because
Absolutely.
I do have been part of a lot of corporations that sort of have that top-down power from above approach. And I think changing the management styles to a more intentional, curiosity seeking, using her formula, even just having her as a speaker, I think could really impact leadership in that, number one, they would be encouraged to look at their own leadership style. Number two, how could they develop it more fully? And number three, make it more of a community-based leadership style so that we're growing people rather than having power over people. So I would just encourage, if any of our listeners have the ability to look at bringing a speaker in, this might be someone you would like to have.
Absolutely. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's a primer for everyone, right?
Absolutely. It's a primer on how to be a good human.
How to be a good human. I think you just came up with a title.
Oh, yes. Awesome.
Thanks, Raquel.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.